coming. As she said, my name is Amy Hill. I am our System Director of School-Based Services for Burrell Behavioral Health. So I just have the opportunity to oversee our school-based programming in all of our counties. We've got 24 counties in Missouri and Arkansas, about 50 school districts that we partner with. And so I have been a therapist for a long time before I moved into this administrative position. So we'll talk a lot about sort of clinical stuff tonight. I'm going to introduce or let our other two people who are going to present introduce themselves here in just a second. But a couple of things that I want to just kind of set the tone for what tonight's going to look like. So number one, it looks like we're going to just kind of have an intimate crowd. And so that's really good. If you guys have questions or you want to interact at all, we are really good and comfortable with that. We really want to provide you guys with the information that you want and that you need as you're leaving here today. So we really have talked a lot about what we can do to support the Nixa School District, and it's no secret that it's been a pretty tough year here for you guys. And so looking at kind of what our topic might be tonight, we really kind of call, in fact, my PowerPoint is called a mashup because we decided to take a bunch of different topics and put them in one because there's been a lot that you guys have experienced. And so we maybe might not address everything a whole bunch, but I want to make sure that we touch on several different topics today. So we're going to talk quite a bit just about youth mental health, like why it's important to know about that, and just kind of talk about signs and symptoms and what that looks like for kids. And then we're also going to talk about bullying. So bullying has been something that people have experienced, not just at Nixa, but every school district and every organization, every setting across the world, we have dealt with bullying. You and I dealt with it when we were growing up, and we can deal with it as adults. And I know that oftentimes when we start talking about mental health, or there's been tragedies or things that have happened, there's also a discussion about bullying. And so we're going to talk about that briefly tonight too. We are certainly going to talk about some suicide prevention and things that you can do to prevent suicide, but we're also going to address some what we call postvention for after there has been a suicide. So we're going to talk about that some too. So I want to make sure you guys are aware of that because that's important for us to cover as well. And then we're also going to just briefly hit on grief and loss. So all of these things are kind of connected. It's an awful lot. I don't typically teach or train on these 4 topics all at once in 1 hour, and I certainly want to respect your time tonight. So we're going to just do our best to hit all of those. I felt like it was going to be really important if we were going to come, that we weren't just going to leave any elephants in the room, or we weren't going to leave anything untouched. If there's something that's been happening, we want to talk about it and at least just touch on it and see what we can provide you guys in regards to information and some strategies. And then hopefully at the end, we've allowed a time for some question and answers. And we are happy to field, no questions are off limits. We're happy to field all questions. I don't know that we're going to have an answer to everything, but I can promise you that we're going to do our best and we'll definitely get back to you. So before we get started, I want to introduce the people who are here with me tonight. So Dr. Fusco.
Hi, I'm Dr. Tamara Fusco. I've actually been a resident here in Nixa for 21 years, and I practice general pediatrics here in Nixa, so this is near and dear to my heart because this is my home community, and I'm thrilled to be able to be here tonight.
I think Candace is going to come up.
Hi, my name is Candace. I have my doctorate in clinical psychology, and I'm a licensed professional counselor.
Lauren's not going to present, but she's going to be on our panel, so she can come introduce herself.
Hi, I think some of you have maybe seen me around. I am the clinical supervisor of the school-based program for Burrell in this district. So,
okay, great. So thanks for being here. We're just going to go ahead and jump right in. If you've ever been around me for 5 minutes, I've probably said something about data and what the Missouri data says, or the Arkansas data, or whatever it is about youth with mental health. I think it's really important for us to really understand what's truly happening with our youth and the things that they're experiencing. And so, I mean, I would probably say 10 out of 10 times I'm going to talk, I'm going to hit on some of these statistics up here, because I think it really does give us a good idea of what the research and what the data says about our kids. In our state of Missouri, there's this thing called the Missouri Student Survey. It's done every couple of years, and it gives us some really great up-to-date information. And a lot of this is from the 2020 survey. So the big thing to understand is that 1 in 5, some studies say 1 in 4 children are truly struggling with a diagnosable mental illness. So that really is a pretty considerable amount of kids who are walking around our hallways every single day. About 25% of all kids truly are struggling with their mental health. We're nowhere near that in recognizing and identifying. We were nowhere near 1 in 5 children getting services for mental health, but we certainly know that they're struggling with it. 50% of all lifetime cases of mental illness occur before the age of 14. So early intervention is key for everything. We know early intervention is key for educational intervention, medical intervention, certainly for mental health intervention as well. And so we really try to focus on helping our kids get the services that they need. We've got a pretty big gap here in intervention when it comes to services. It takes about 8 to 10 years for kids to start receiving treatment. So it's not like they just suddenly got depressed last night and they need to see a counselor the next day. They've been struggling with their feelings and their thoughts and their mental health for a really long time before the majority of them ever see a therapist or a counselor. And I'm not going to read the rest of these Missouri statistics just one by one, but you guys can see these here. So we've got about 54% of all kids feeling very sad. So just because they're feeling very sad doesn't mean that they're depressed, right? Doesn't mean that they meet criteria. I just told you only 1 in 5 actually have a mental illness. But 50% of them report feeling very sad some of their days. So it's not like we just ask the question, have you ever felt sad once? It's, do you feel sad and how often? 50% of them say, yeah, I do, I feel sad a lot of days. A lot of them have anxiety. You'll see that we have quite a few students in our state that get suspended. And we know that about 12% of Missouri high school students had seriously considered suicide in 2020. I don't know that I have the, yes, right there, 4.9% of them attempted it. And then about 8% of them have a plan. So we do have a big chunk of our Missouri students that are walking around every day struggling with suicidal thoughts and not really knowing what to do with that. So when we understand the data and why, and really what's happening with our kids, that just propels us forward to say, we gotta do something. We can't just sit on this research and do nothing. We have to be looking at ways that we can intervene and really help our kids feel better. I'm gonna pass to Dr. Fusco.
Yes, and does it just go? Okay, great. Well, as I said, I'm Dr. Tamara Fusco, and I was a practicing pediatrician here in Nixa for 18 years, but for the last 3 years, I joined with Burrell to focus on pediatric mental health. I do still have children, and I have a child in the school district, and my other 2 graduated from Nixa, completing the entirety of their K through 12 years here. So I'm very, very happy to be here to talk about this today. You know, it's been a hard year. This pandemic, it's been hard, it's been scary, it's been isolating, it's been stressful, it's been strange. And it's impacted all of us, and it most definitely has impacted our children as well. Every day in my inbox, I'm getting briefs from the American Academy of Pediatrics. And what we're finding is rates in the emergency room for mental illness diagnosis in our children have gone up, in some cases by 24%. Also, we are seeing increasing rates of anxiety and depression, and most sobering, we're seeing increased rates of suicidal ideation and suicide attempts with it. So tonight, I want to talk about how do we as parents, how do we as families recognize that our children are experiencing mental health stress? So certainly the easiest and most direct way is to ask, is to keep those open lines of communication and to ask frequently, hey, how are you feeling? But to also ask in a way that you're not just putting them on the spot. You know, I've been stressed, I'm kind of tired, and I think I'm feeling kind of grumpy. Are you feeling that way too? You know, a lot of kids feel this way. So is this something that you are feeling? However, remember that some of our youngest children really don't know how to express their feelings or even maybe talk about it. So that might not work. Or our adolescents, maybe they don't want to open up. Maybe they see it as a sign of weakness or a sign of fear, and you know, that's definitely not cool, right? Also, sometimes they don't want to worry us as parents. Maybe they do see us stressed and don't want to add to our burden. So although that's a really great way of keeping those open lines of communication, fortunately kids communicate with us in other ways too. And we can actually see behavioral changes that can maybe give us a clue that our child is struggling. So in young children, children can exhibit stress in many different ways. So not all children will exhibit these signs, but these are some common things that we do see. In young children, we can see a regression in skills or developmental milestones. Perhaps that child who's been potty trained for quite some time all of a sudden starts bedwetting. Or perhaps that child who's very good at daily life skills like buttoning up my clothes or things like that, all of a sudden says, I can't, I need help, that type of thing. So looking for those signs of regression. We know kids get more irritable and fussy, but some kids will also start crying a lot. They seem to maybe cry at the drop of a hat, something that wouldn't have bothered them before, and you're wondering, good grief, what's going on? So looking for signs like that can be helpful. Now, sleep disruption is a big one. We can see kids all of a sudden having difficulty getting to sleep or waking up several times in the night. We also see more nightmares, or maybe a child doesn't want to go to sleep unless their parent is there, or the light is on, and maybe that's a change in that child. We see kids who might get very clingy, that they might have difficulty separating. Maybe that child who used to run from the car line into the classroom all of a sudden is holding back, holding on to the parent, or at home maybe doesn't want the parent to go to the grocery store without them, or doesn't even maybe want them out of the room while they're playing. So those can all be signs that something's going on, something is stressful. We can see the opposite. We can see instead of a child being clingy, we can see a child all of a sudden becoming very aggressive or throwing tantrums, and you're not really sure what the spark is. And then lastly, one of the things that we may notice is that we might have a child who starts talking more about sickness or death or worrying about it, or their play might involve those things of sickness or death, or maybe the drawings start showing those types of things as well. Now, in older children, we can certainly see mood changes. And I know a lot of you are like, okay, love, I've got a teenager, I see mood changes anyway. Well, I'm really talking about those things that are pretty different. We can see irritability, anger, sadness, and certainly a lot of conflict at home. They seem to not get along with anybody. We can also see withdrawal, that maybe they're not as interested in things that they used to do. Maybe they're not texting or video chatting their friends. Maybe they're not participating in family activities that they used to enjoy, and that can certainly be a sign. Once again, we see sleep disruption. These kiddos may have difficulty getting to sleep. They can't turn off their brain. They're having thoughts just continuing. Or they may have night wakening, where they're up several times at night and can't get back to sleep. And certainly in our adolescence, we may also see oversleeping, where they're really sleeping more than you would expect them to do. We can see changes in appetite, and we can see changes in weight. Both ways. We can see loss of appetite, or we can kind of see hyperphagia, a lot more appetite. We can see loss of weight, or as many of us have experienced during this pandemic, we might see a little extra weight as well. We can all of us, when we're stressed, may have difficulty concentrating or paying attention or keeping our focus. And for our older children, that certainly may affect their grades and their homework, their completion of their homework. So looking for a change. If you're straight A or straight B student, all of a sudden is coming home with C's and D's and F's, there's something going on. Now, changes in appearance. We'll sometimes have kiddos who maybe were very concerned about how they looked, and did they have the right thing that their peers had on, to stop showering, or maybe not taking care of their hair, or starting to pick out those clothes out of the hamper. And so we can see some changes in personal hygiene, and that can give us a clue as well. We see risky behaviors, where adolescents might start experimenting with alcohol or drugs, or doing actions that do put them at danger, driving erratically, putting themselves in a dangerous situation. Certainly they tell us that they have more thoughts of death, thoughts of suicide, and that is certainly an indication of stress. And then certainly with our older kiddos, we do see a lot of somatic symptoms. I will tell you that adolescents will be much more likely to come to us as pediatricians for the complaints of a headache, or abdominal pain, diarrhea, or chest pain, versus coming to tell us, I just feel really bad, I'm really worried, I'm really sad, those types of things. So looking for those somatic symptoms, those body symptoms, where we don't really see anything physical there, is certainly an indication that your child is having mental health stress. So what can we as parents do if we know we've recognized it, we know something's different? How do we support our children with this? I would say we start off with the basics. Sleep, diet, and exercise. We know that's good for our healthy body. It's also good for our mind. We know we need a sufficient amount of sleep. You know, if I don't have enough sleep, I'm cranky. And if I'm already stressed, that really extends that. So we want to make sure all of our kids are getting adequate amounts of sleep with this. diet. For our very younger children, we recommend anywhere between 10 and 13 hours. That would be our young elementary. Our middle school, junior high, we'd like to see at least 9 to 11 hours. Our teenagers, we'd like to see at least 8 to 10 hours of sleep. And we want to make sure that they have a consistent routine, right? That we're planning bedtime at the same time every night. Maybe we're doing things like warm showers to kind of relax us, vasodilate them. We may be doing things like calming activities, reading, quiet music. All those things can help and keep as part of our sleep routine. And certainly we want to make sure that we're limiting our digital media. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that we turn off all digital media at least an hour before bedtime. As far as diet goes, we want to make sure we're having a healthy diet. I would recommend that we don't forget about protein-rich foods. These are foods that help keep our blood glucose steady. We also want to think about foods that have omega fatty 3 acids. Those have been shown to elevate our mood. Those would be things like flaxseed, dark leafy vegetables, fish, tofu, pinto beans, kidney beans, those types of things. And then, of course, we want to make sure we're getting enough fruits and vegetables to give us those minerals that our brain needs to work optimally. And then lastly, exercise. It's great for us physically, but it's also great for us mentally. Our body releases endorphins, which absolutely affects our mood. We want to continue with consistent routines. There has not been a lot that we've been able to control with this pandemic, but keeping our routines stable is something that we can control. And having that routine, knowing what to expect, is something that all makes us feel safer and helps our mental health as well. Sunshine, that's one of the easiest ones. Getting enough sunshine and getting outdoors. For years we've known the power of sunshine, and we've even known light. That's why sometimes we'll have these artificial lights or things to help us in the wintertime to make sure that we're getting enough light to help our mental health. We absolutely want to stay connected to our families. We want to preserve family time, and we also want to make sure that we have downtime together. So family time, making sure that maybe we have a consistent dinner time, that we all gather together so that we can interact. Or maybe we do things like take walks, hikes, bike rides together. Or maybe we do board games together, or put together a puzzle, or even just cook together. Those are things that are important that keep us connected to each other and keep those lines of communication open. Social connections are very important, especially in our adolescence, so we want to make sure they are staying in touch with their friends, whether it's by text or by video chat, any way to keep connected. But of course we do want to balance the screen time. We want to use our screen time for education and for staying connected, but at the same time we don't want our screen time to be everything in our life. We need to have physical activity, we need to have downtime, we need to have connectedness without the digital media as well. Acts of kindness and helping others. When we do things for other people, we stop thinking about how badly we feel, right? So this can be as simple as making sure to contact grandma every day or every 2 days or something like that. Sending a letter, doing just something kind actually helps us as well as helps the person that we are helping. Gratitude and appreciation. So when we change the way that we think, if we're thinking negative, oh, I hate this pandemic, I hate not being able to go anywhere, I hate not doing things with my friends, I hate not going to the movie theater, that's kind of that negative spiral. So we really want to change our feelings. We recommend thinking at least 3 things a day to be grateful for. I love that the trees are blooming. I love that it's getting warmer. I love that we have spaghetti for dinner tonight. That's fantastic. And so sometimes, even especially with our younger children, we can do things like keep a happy journal. So every day say, I want you to write 3 things that are good today. I don't like anything. There's nothing good today. Oh, really? Well, I see you're wearing pink tennis shoes. Those are pretty awesome. They're rocking. Okay, yeah, maybe right. Okay, I like the pink tennis shoes. Okay, let's find something else that's good. Let's find something else that's great. And that can help change the way that we think and absolutely help our mental health. And then the last thing I really want to emphasize is we as parents have been stressed as well. We have experienced these same types of things. And our kids know it, and they feel it, and they feed off of it. So I think it's absolutely important for us as parents and caregivers and families to make sure that we are doing self-care, that we're doing mindfulness, that we're giving ourselves a break, that we're having some downtime, we're getting some exercise, that we're staying connected. because if we don't, we certainly can't help our kiddos as well. Now, if you find that all of these things don't seem to be helping, that your child is still struggling or having problems, excuse me, I went too far. Okay, well, at the end of this, we'll also have some more resources that if your child is still struggling and not doing well, where can you go for help? And we'll have that in a little bit in our presentation.
Thank you. That was super helpful with all the tips that Dr. Fusco had. So we're going to encourage you to just look beneath the surface, to be thinking of your child and their behavior as an iceberg. So what we always see is the tip of the iceberg, right? That's what sticks out, and that's what we think it causes the problem. But the tip of the iceberg wouldn't be such an issue if there wasn't all that ice built up underneath. It wasn't the top of the iceberg that sunk the Titanic. It was everything underneath it. And so when we see behaviors from kids, what we have to understand is that behavior is just communicating something to us. The behavior isn't the problem. It's the symptom of the problem. It's giving that their behaviors are communicating something to us. And underneath the surface can be everything that we can't see that's going on with kids. So I don't know if any of you have ever raised teenagers, but I'm a mom of 4. My oldest is 16 and my youngest is 4. And so I have all kinds, I just have a crazy life, okay? That probably just explained it. It just can get nuts in my house sometimes. But if you've parented teenagers, you understand that what you see sometimes is just attitude, aggression, refusal to do anything they're supposed to do. But there's so much more going on. So I can think of so many times that we've spent 2 hours in my house and no one's getting along and there's all kinds of yelling and I can't figure out, and then 2 hours later, one of them comes to me crying because of something of a bad experience they had with a friend during the day. And that's what triggered all of these other things. And here I'm about ready to pull my hair out and theirs, right? About ready to call someone to come rescue my kid because I'm not going to make it through the night either. It's either her or me, but one of us is not coming out of this house standing. I know that's how some of you feel sometimes. But typically it's because there's so much else going on. So I describe it sometimes as like a splinter. So if you have a splinter, it eventually has to work itself to the surface. It can't just stay underneath the skin. And if you were like me growing up and you'd get a splinter and your mom and dad would come at you with a pair of tweezers and it would it's traumatizing thinking they're going to dig this out. But then oftentimes what we hear is just leave that thing alone. I don't know if that's what you would say too, but my kids' pediatricians have said, leave it alone, it's going to come out. Don't go digging it out, that sometimes makes it worse. But it can fester and it can be ugly when it comes out and it can hurt and it can do those things, but it can't stay in there forever. It has to work its way out. And it's the same thing with behavior. So when you see behavior in your kids, just ask yourself, what are they trying to communicate to me? What are they trying to say? Their behavior is just a symptom of something that's going on, and there's got to be more under the surface. And really spend some time trying to figure that part out. I'm going to talk briefly about the 4 elements of flourishing. At Burrell, we partner with a neuropsychologist by the name of Dr. Paul Baker, and he has put together this model called the person brain model. And he says that there's 4 elements of flourishing, and that we all have to have them in order to flourish and to survive well. And if one of them is missing, we're going to go looking to fill that void or that attachment somewhere else. And so the 4 elements that he says that we all have to exist to flourish, the same thing with our kids, is we have to feel safe, we have to feel significant, we have to feel respected, and we have to feel related. So just hearing those 4, if I were to ask you, if you had to pick one that you think is the most important, what would you say? Someone yell it out. Safety, absolutely. That's the #1 thing that we have to function and to function well. And we're not just talking about physical safety. Obviously, physical safety is very important, but this is also psychological safety. Something that I say to people in educational settings all the time is that kids can't learn if they don't feel safe. But teachers can't teach if they don't feel safe. And sometimes no one feels safe in the classroom. It's the same. It can be the same thing when we're working with our parents at home, or with our kids at home as parents. We can't do anything at all if we don't feel safe. So psychological and physical safety is the #1 thing. If we have a threat to our safety, we're going to kick into our survival brain 10 out of 10 times, and then we're going to make decisions based off of just keeping ourselves alive that isn't going to be very logical or help us in the future. So we have to feel safe. Our kids have to feel safe. And if you think, well, I don't know why they don't feel safe. Look, we've got this nice house or whatever. Think about in regards to psychological safety also. So other than safety, what would you guess what number 2 would be? Any guesses on the second most important one? I mean, I can see why you would think that, and a lot of kids would probably say that, but it's actually related. So our brains are developed to live in connection with other people. We have to have connection with other people. We have to be in relationship with others in order to survive and survive well. We will be looking for connection and for relationship in places where we shouldn't if we don't get it in places where we should. And that's so important for our kids. They have to feel related and connected in order to really flourish. And I know sometimes our kids don't necessarily come in the door and give us a whole bunch of vibes that they want to hang out with us and they want to be our good bud for the evening, right? I mean, there might be times that you don't ever see them. They go to their bedroom and they don't ever come out, and you just kind of interpret that as they just don't want to have a relationship with me. That's not true at all. In fact, that's contrary to what we know in neuroscience. We are looking for relationship. Our kids are designed to be in connection with other people. And if they can't feel related to their parents or their teachers or their caregivers or their siblings, they're going to find that connection somewhere else because they have to have it. Significant and respected are also very important. We have to feel like we contribute. Significance is really just about contributing. And our kids are no different. They have to feel like they have value and that they have something to give other people. And I think sometimes with kids, we think maybe that they don't have a lot to contribute. Like they don't know what they think they know. Maybe sometimes they make things worse. But they have to feel like they are significant, that they matter to you and to other people, and that they're contributing, that they have a purpose. We just spin our wheels if we feel like we're not contributing anything at all, that there's no significance. And if they don't feel significant, like related or safe at home, they will go looking for other places to feel significant. And then respected would be very similar. They have to feel like they matter and that we respect them and we care about them. I think that gets tough with kids sometimes too, because we have this idea in our heads, the kids need to respect us. Like, I'm the adult here, you need to show me respect for no other reason other than just because I'm your mom. But the same thing goes for them. They need to feel respect too. And it can't just be, I'll respect you when you respect me. And that's what we say a lot of times in the world. I'll show him respect when he shows me respect. We all need to feel respected, and that's important. And if we don't feel respected, we really can't flourish, and we're going to be looking for places where we can. So the 4 elements of flourishing are pretty important to think about when you're working with your kiddos or you're dealing with your kiddos. Do they feel safe and do they feel related? Start there. Start with those 2 things, and then think about significance and respect. Candace is going to come talk to us about bullying.
Hello. So you'll see I have some papers, and the reason that I have these papers is that I have a group of kids who actually help prepare for tonight. I do groups at the school, and one of the things that I like to do is when I'm doing a special night like this is I have the kids help me. And so I told them, I said, you know kids, I'm going to be doing this talk about bullying. And this is your opportunity to tell some of the adults some things that you think maybe they don't understand. What are some things that you want them to know? And so I have some quotes that this is what they thought that the adults in their lives should know, what the experience is like for them. This morning, I didn't want to walk to the bus stop, excuse me, because I knew my morning was going to start with name calling. This little boy, he's in trouble with the attendance officer. Often doesn't want to go to school, and I think at school they don't quite realize at this point some of the reasons that he's trying to not go to school. Second child, I spend a lot of time in the nurse's office because my stomach hurts. I don't want to go to PE because no one picks me to be on the team. They say I'll make them lose. I'd rather fail PE for non-participation. Every day, these kids online tell me I should kill myself. Kids tell me I stink. I take a shower every night, but they still tell me I'm dirty. I don't have anyone to play with on the playground. It makes me feel like an alien, like I don't belong, like I'll never belong. I've tried reporting the bullying. I've called the bullying hotline. I started cutting, thinking maybe someone will finally pay attention. I was talking to my uncle who has PTSD from being in a war. I have some of the same problems he has, except he said he found best friends in the war. I feel like I'm alone on the battleground. I'm missing school 3 days a week because of the bullying. Why should I be considering virtual school because I can't handle it, instead of the bully taking virtual school because they can't handle not tormenting someone? So when we see the statistic of 1 in 5 kids, I want you to think of 5 children in your life that you love and realize that one of those 5 may be going through something like this. One of the 5 may be going through the pain. In the words that these children shared. Today, I was in a group of 10 children, and we were talking about bullying, and I was sharing that I was going to be having this presentation. They were very animated of how much that they feel that the adults don't get what bullying is like for them and their life, that it's not the kid that's standing on a corner trying to shake them down for money, that their bullying often is more the electronic type. It is the kids after school who are getting on the games, getting on social media, spreading rumors, sharing pictures, making up information, making up fake accounts. I've seen this one more and more, where they're saying that they're posting under their name, causing many problems. So this is the type of bullying that's changed from when we were children. 5.4 million children skip school a year due to bullying. Now think about the effects of this. Think about they skip school. Now we have a child that's falling behind. We have a child that the test scores are dropping. We have a child that now is at risk for not graduating. So we continue to have risks along the way. 9 out of 10, we have LGBTQ plus students. This was something else that came up today. In a group of 10, several of the individuals who identified in this group, they shared their stories, and their peers indicated that more than any other group, it was their opinion that they're seeing bullied in the hallways. One of the individuals in the group, she's new to the school. She says she hopes it's going to be different in her new school. So the first one, when it talks about media and misconceptions. So anytime in the news when there is a suicide and there is perhaps evidence or thoughts that might be bullying related, there can be, some people will believe, a causal relationship or a thought that the suicide is caused by bullying. We want to be careful with that. We want to be careful to not say that it is a causal relationship. We can say that there can be a relationship, but not that it is the only cause, it is the only relationship. Doing so does take away some of the other areas that we want to highlight, that we want to know that some of the other aspects that went into this, that we need to be looking at what are the mental illnesses, what are the social supports like, what does the family have as far as resources in the community. So we know, research tells us that what we need to do, what we need to focus on is to lower the risk factors and to increase the protective factors. So what that means, when we lower the risk factors, where we do not have a child who does not have someone they connect with at school, that's one of the number one things. So if you look into bullying research and you want to look at ways to prevent it, over and over you find if that child can have one teacher, it doesn't even have to be a teacher. If it's a janitor, if it's someone that's in nutrition services, if it's the first person, the receptionist, that when they walk in the building, if they know that someone in that building sees them, knows them, cares about them, has an idea of what is going on in their life, that can make all the difference. So that's one huge recommendation. The second is getting the children involved in extracurriculars. Many of these children, they're going to report that their self-esteem is plummeted. If you go to school every day and you're being told you're worthless, these are the reasons we don't like you, you're not going to have any friends, and some of these kids said, you stink, you're dirty, we don't want you on our team, it's definitely going to take a toll. And this is why we want to get the kids into something that boosts up the confidence, whether that be something that they're naturally good at, which might be sports, maybe it's art, or maybe it's something that they need some training in. Maybe it's something that isn't even necessarily skill-based as much as it is just connecting. Maybe it's some type of social group, but we want to get them involved. Extracurriculars are a huge one. We want to get them into different social programs. If it's church, maybe it's Boys and Girls Club, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, getting as many type of opportunities like that as possible. Increasing those friendships. Sometimes these kids tell me, I have acquaintances. I wouldn't really say that I have a best friend. Or I have some kids that sometimes, and this is if they're lucky, some of the kids tell me, quite a few actually, I don't have anyone to eat with at lunch. They want to come with me for lunch. So as a school-based clinician, they're requesting to come have lunch with me because they don't have anyone to eat with. Okay, it's embarrassing, it's lonely, it highlights the alienation that they're feeling when they see everyone else connecting and they're alone. So, if you have a child that you notice is not really developing these type of friendships, closeness, that's absolutely an area to continue focusing on. Your family relationships. Is there someone in the family that the child can go to? Is there someone that they can open up to? Maybe this is a time that we need to take a really close examination. Now listen, as Amy was saying, I also have a teenager. I understand, and I'm a therapist, right? And that does not mean that everything is smooth and fantastic all the time. It is a normal part of development that there are going to be some rocky points in adolescence because they are trying to get their autonomy, their independence, right? However, sometimes we do need some further intervention. Sometimes family therapy may be needed. Maybe it needs to be simply more time together. Okay, so look at all of those risk factors. Look at those protective factors. What is bullying exactly? So bullying, first off, is going to have this aspect of aggression, but the big thing with that is going to be a power imbalance. And it does not just mean a physical power imbalance. It's going to be that there, in some way, one individual has more power. It may be that the person has more social power, that they have more clout in the school, they're more popular. It might be that they have more money. It might be that they have more academic power. It can be that they have more social skills. That's a big one, okay? So if you have one kid coming at you and calling you names and put downs, and you're a child that maybe is slower to respond to that, you don't have the quicker wit as far as being able to respond quickly to those type of insults, that is going to set you up, and that is going to define bullying. So when there is a power differential between the two, also intellectual disability or any type of disability. And then when there are repeated acts. So if it's a one-time situation, if two kids are on a playground and they get into a verbal altercation or even a physical altercation, we don't define that as bullying. So bullying is going to be a repeat. It's going to be happening more than once. And yes, we want to be careful. There are links to suicide, but as I always say, correlation does not equal causation. So we can find correlations, but we're not going to say that's a direct cause. We're going to say that this is one of the many aspects that go into what can contribute. And why do we want to have concern about that first misconception? One of the reasons is they have found if there is a lot of, or too much emphasis on that first one, there can be copycat suicides with bullying. So in other words, if we normalize that the response when we are bullied, that a suicide occurs, it can increase a contagion type of experience. And with interventions, again, I'm huge on this idea of looking at what we can do to decrease any of those aspects that can cause difficulties, and then to increase those that are going to act as buffers. So some of this is kind of the repeat here. So really kind of getting them into these safe friendships, finding more of those activities, and again, really working on self-esteem. What is not up there, we want to have in the school, I highly recommend that as a school-wide system and in your own homes with your own children, that you're working on empathy building, okay? Because one thing we haven't talked so much up here, and it might be further on another slide, is we've talked about the effect of the individual being bullied, but not so much the bully, okay? The individual who is engaging in bullying behavior is also in need of intervention, is also in need of services. And quite often, those individuals are being or have been bullied themselves. And who is at the highest risk, actually, for suicide? Well, the individuals that we call bully victims, where they are in both roles. So I want to share an activity that I do with the kids in session. And I actually just did this a couple of hours ago in a group with kids, and we were talking about bullying. And there are many kids in this group that are experiencing bullying. And so this child gave me permission to share this. It's completely anonymous, but I am able to share some aspects. So they chose the cord here represents, every single cord represents it's symbolic of a different aspect of their self that when they look at, when they can wear, to remind what they do love about themselves. So the purple is a reminder, you know what, I love the fact that I have different kinds of friends, okay? That my friends are not all the same, and I'm really proud of that about myself. The second is, I stand up for myself. I let people know what I like and what I don't like. And this is something I don't want to change about myself. The third is that, I think it was the yellow, I always say hi to the lunch ladies every single day, and I thank them when they give me my tray. And he's really proud of that he is friendly on a daily basis. And the fourth is that I'm a really good dog owner, and I am really, I treat my dog really good, and he knows I love him. So, this child has struggled with recently being told at school, you should go home and kill yourself on a daily basis. And then he goes home and also is met with those same messages when he's trying to relax and enjoy himself. If that gives you an idea of some of the difficulties. And when he looks forward to wearing this because he says, you know what, there are a lot of good things about myself, and I think that this will be helpful to remember.
So we're going to talk a little bit about suicide for the next few minutes, and I definitely want to make sure that we get to the opportunity for you guys to be able to ask some questions. And so we're going to talk just for a few minutes. I want to make sure that you guys kind of understand the difference here. So we're going to talk about prevention, which is going to be more of our early detections, warning signs, and ways that we can intervene before the problem gets worse. And then we're going to talk about response. And those are the interventions that are going to occur right in the middle of the crisis. And then we're going to talk about postvention, which is the things that we need to do after there's been a suicide to make sure that we're following up. And so this next few slides might be kind of heavy, okay? So just prepare yourself. It might be kind of heavy, but also very important. I want to talk you through this thing that we call QPR. QPR is a training. It's a model that a lot of people is recommended in the mental health field in regards to suicide response. So QPR stands for question. And then the P stands for persuade them, and then the R stands for refer and tell. So a couple of things that I want to address in the very beginning. The first one is just questioning and acknowledging. There really is this myth, and I hear it all the time, that if you ask kids about suicide, or you talk to kids about suicide, they're not going to want to live. And that truly is a myth. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with a lot of kids over the years, and I'll go ahead and let you guys know, I have lost a client that I was working with to suicide. And so I think all of us have probably been affected by suicide in some way, shape, and form in our lives. And I've heard so many times from parents that, my kid never mentioned suicide until I got him in therapy. You guys put that thought in his head. That is a myth. That is not the way it works. They're talking about suicide because somebody's asking them for the first time. And so I think there's a fear associated with questioning. What might their response be? I've worked with a lot of adults that have just been afraid to even ask, are you struggling at all with suicide? Or do you have suicidal thoughts? Because they'll say, I have no idea what to do if they say yes. Just even the fear of what they might say. So really getting over that hurdle of being afraid to mention it or talk about it. You have to question and you have to ask. If you ask a teenage kid a yes or no question, you're going to get a yes or no response, right? Did you have a good day today? Yes. Did you visit with any of your friends? Yes. I mean, we've learned that we have to ask open-ended questions to get them to say things to us. So if you might say to a kiddo, hey, how are you feeling? Are you struggling with wanting to live or not? They might just say yes or no. But instead, maybe ask some of these questions. Like, I've noticed something seems a little bit off with you lately. Is there something going on? Or you seem a little bit sadder than I've noticed you before. I'm really concerned about how you're feeling. Will you tell me about how you're feeling? And it is okay to say, when you ask some of these questions, are you thinking about killing yourself? Do you have those thoughts? That's an okay question to ask. And we're going to talk about what you do if their answer is yes. Okay? The second thing that we would say is to persuade, to really listen to the kids and to listen carefully. So many times, kind of going back to this 4 elements of flourishing, if they don't feel related, if they don't feel connected, if they don't feel listened to, they're probably not gonna say these things to you anymore. But just acknowledge them and let them know, I'm here to listen to you. I want to hear what you have to say. You can tell me anything. Avoid judgment, okay? The last thing we're going to want you to do is say, well, why would you do that? That would make your mom so sad. Or why would you want to do that? Look at all of these things that you have going on in your life. They're really great. Do you know how that would make everybody feel if you did that? Those are judgmental statements. Stay completely away from that. And even if you've never felt sad a day in your life or you've never struggled with it on your own, if you can just say, I understand and I hear you say that you're really not sure if you want to live. Or if you have felt sad, it's okay to say, I felt pretty sad before too, so let's talk about this. Just avoid any kind of judgment whatsoever. Definitely express your concern to them. At this point in time in my career, I've worked with hundreds, if not 1,000 kids. I've heard story after story after story, and some really terrible ones, you guys, as you can imagine, some really, really terrible ones. But I've also heard stories from kids who have said, I've been thinking about suicide, not really sure I wanted to live, but my home ec teacher, or my FACS teacher in 7th hour told me she was really looking forward to seeing me tomorrow. Or my youth minister said that he can't wait till I come to church on Wednesday night. Or my mom said, hey, tomorrow we're going to go and we're just going to get our nails painted. Express to them that their life is important to you. Like, I want you to be here. I need you to be here because I care about you and your life is important to me. Not because I would be so terribly sad if you took your life. We're avoiding judgment and we're not placing guilt, but we're expressing to these kiddos that I really want to see you again. I want you in my life and you're very important to me. And then reassure them that there is help. If I've learned anything in the last 15 years, I've learned this, and I promise you I've learned it the hard way. There is always hope. There is always, always, always hope. Neuroscience, brain research proves it to us. But I remember lots of times thinking, man, that kid is too far gone, there is no hope. Or this situation is never going to get better. And I say I learned it the hard way because if I was being honest, I've probably even said those words as a therapist out loud before. And now I stand here telling you ashamed that I felt that way, because what I've learned is that there is always hope. And nobody has to live this way every single day. I tell kids all the time, sure, we have to live with feeling sad and feeling anxious sometimes. Those are normal feelings, but you do not have to live like feeling this way every single day. They don't. There's always help, and there's always hope. And I think that kids need to know that there is hope that things are going to get better. It might not be tomorrow, and it might not look the way that they want it to, but I promise you, there's hope. There's hope and there's help. And so we just need to reassure kids that there's always help. And then the R in our QPR model stands for refer and tell. And so oftentimes we're afraid to tell. Or we might be afraid, I'm a mom, and so my kids grow up with a therapist, which also means there's been a lot of times they've woken me up in the middle of the night to tell me that their friend sent them a text message, Mom, what do I do about this? What do I do about that? And every single time I say, we're going to tell someone. We're going to tell. I have called parents who I do not know at all on the phone to say, I need you to know, your daughter just told my daughter she's not really feeling like she wants to live. Like, I have to tell. You have to refer and you have to tell. And we have to empower our kids to do the same thing. Because so often, kids say, gosh, they ask me not to tell anybody, and if I tell, they're going to be mad. Listen, if they're talking about not wanting to live, they're telling you that for a reason. And they might be mad at you for a minute, but at least they're going to still be alive to be mad at you. Wouldn't you rather that be the case? And so even if it looks like, hey, you don't have to go tell them, or you don't have to, we can find a roundabout way for you to get to the counselor's office, or you can tell an adult, or whatever it might be. But you have to tell. You have to refer and tell. You're going to want to always include a caregiver. If it's a kid, like I said, I've called parents I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily recommend everybody do that, but I would definitely recommend you reach out to the school counselor, a school teacher, a school principal, whatever it might be. If there's somebody that you know that is struggling with thoughts of not wanting to live, a kid, or your kid has a friend, always, always recommend that they tell. So if you can just remember QPR, that acronym, question, ask them questions, persuade them to live, and then always refer them for help. Okay, just don't let them leave here. Just don't let them go to bed without thinking, what do I need to do here to get my kiddo some help? So here's what we would do in a suicide response. We're going to always recommend that if a kid reports that they are not wanting to live, that we get help right away. You automatically get help. Oftentimes that looks like going to the hospital for an evaluation, which I know can be a really scary thing for parents. And the other thing I hear from parents all the time is, not all the time, but often, because I hear that, well, they weren't thinking that until you put that thought in their head. Okay, that's a myth. We absolutely know that's not true. And the second thing is, I think they're just doing this for attention. Okay, that might be the case. They very well might be doing this for attention. But would you want them to take their life for attention? If it's that severe, if they're saying those things, something that severe because they want attention, we still have to get help. So regardless of the reasons why you think this kid is suicidal, I think sometimes we get stuck in this whole thought process of, well, let me just figure out what's going on and see what we can fix it. Let's just deal with it in the moment. And that might look like going to the emergency room and having an assessment for hospitalization. And it might look like hospitalization. But our ultimate goal is just to keep the kid alive. So no matter what it takes, then we're going to be willing to do those. We at Burrell have a crisis team. We have a 24-hour call, 7 days a week. Both of these numbers are available. If you've got any questions or thoughts or concerns or any of that, we can always call and get help. We are not the only people, by the way, at the 24-hour hotline. Okay, there's a national hotline. There's a text number that a lot of teenagers can use to text. We know that teenagers oftentimes are going to communicate through text and not through phone. So there's a lot of places to call and get help. And in a very rare case, I've had a parent say, well, what am I going to do if I can't get him there? Like, what can I do? Or what do I do if it's my next door neighbor and their parent, like they're saying this to my daughter and the parent's refusing to let us come over and talk? If you have to call the police to get help, call the police to get help. Because at the end of the day, our goal here is to keep kids alive and adults, okay? So let's talk about some postvention. So we've all been affected by suicide, and I would love to stand here and say that this is never going to happen again, but I've had to come to the realization in my own life as a professional, working with kids all the time, That if I'm going to work with kids in mental health, I have to understand the risks that that means, and it might mean that a kid is going to take their life again. And so what are some post-vention strategies here? So number one, we have to have a plan. So whenever there is a suicide, we have to have a well-thought-out plan of how we're going to address that and how we're going to deal with it. We can't pretend it didn't happen, and we need to definitely address it. So we want to have a plan. Candace talked briefly about suicide contagion. So that is very rare, guys. It is very, very rare. It doesn't happen all that often, but it does happen. And that's oftentimes talked about as suicide contagion, or like a cluster suicide. You might hear it referred to as a cluster suicide, where one person, or a copycat, where one person does it, and then it maybe just catches some steam, and you might see multiple people do that. So you do have to be somewhat careful about suicide contagion. You don't want to, I don't know if I want to find the right word here. We don't want to talk too much about it. Okay, we don't want to talk, and I know I just got finished telling you that asking a kid if they're suicidal is not going to make them suicidal. So I'm not telling you two totally different things here. But we do need to just be careful for that and make sure that we have a plan in place, we have supports in place, we know what to look for, and we're not going to like glorify the situation. I also would not, like we talked about, we don't have villains here. Okay, so we don't want to place blame and say it's this person's fault, or this kid was being bullied, or the school didn't deal with X, Y, and Z. I mean, we have to avoid those sorts of thinking. First of all, it's not helpful and beneficial. I've never met a single person that got relief from their pain dealing with suicide by finding multiple people to blame for it. That just doesn't even, it's not effective, it's not gonna help. But it also could be dangerous for other people around. Communication is so very important. And this is one that I think as adults we struggle with a lot with kids. I'm pretty famous for saying have adult conversations with adults and kid conversations with kids. And I think we mix those sometimes, and that is not good for kids. So I definitely believe we have adult conversations with adults and kid conversations with kids. However, sometimes we think that no communication at all is better for children, and it's not. It's not better. So if we don't, I don't know if any of you have heard of Brene Brown, but I love Brene Brown. She's a social worker, and she's a researcher, and she talks about that if we don't have information that we need, we're going to make up stories. And that's exactly what happens, right? I might walk past a friend at Target that I haven't seen for a while, and I wave, and she doesn't wave back, and she turns and she walks the other way, and immediately I'm thinking, oh gosh, I've made her mad. She doesn't like me anymore, she doesn't X, Y, and Z. I've completely made up a story for what has happened. Maybe that's true, but it's also possible that she didn't even see me waving. She was super preoccupied, she had a lot on her mind, she was distracted by what was in front of her, but I made up a story. So if we don't communicate accurate information, our kids are going to make stories up. We've heard it and we've seen it, and then they're left to their own thinking of what could have happened. Could that happen to me? Was it so-and-so's fault? Was it this or that? And so although we don't want to talk nonstop about it, we have got to communicate. So an idea of just saying I'm not going to say anything at all, or I'm just going to give very, very brief details, that isn't beneficial either. And even if it's like, I've heard so many stories about things that have happened. And your kids will start rumors and it'll spread like wildfire. And you might have somebody who's gone home with a stomach ache, but by the end of the day, everybody thinks that the kid went home because they found 2 pounds of marijuana in his backpack. I mean, those are the sorts of things that happen if you aren't communicating facts. So don't be hesitant to don't think, gosh, I'm just not going to tell them anything. We're just not going to talk about it. That's not best either, because they will make up stories. It will happen. I make up stories, you make up stories, it's going to happen. So we're going to encourage you to just communicate facts with kids in a language that kids can hear. So have kid conversations with kids, adult conversations with adults, but make sure you're having the conversation and you're not just avoiding the communication in general. And then offer support and look for support. If you hear me say anything tonight, I'm going to say it again. There's always hope and there's always help. And so look for ways that you can be supportive and offer support. So let's talk about grief for the next couple of minutes, and then I want to open it up for question and answer. So anytime there's been a death, or there's been a suicide, or even not those things, it could be just grief from a move. I heard Candace was saying something about someone moving, and I'll tell you, I met a little Nixa student who had been here just a couple of days when there was the tragedy in Nixa, and she said, oh my gosh, I don't have anybody to talk to. She was a brand new student. And so it could be a move like that, like it was a move, a change in her family circumstances. We're going to see kids go through grief. And we're going to see adults go through grief. And grief is a natural process, and you guys have probably heard it is a process, and they describe grief oftentimes more of a cycle than a linear movement. Because as soon as you think you're feeling better, you might be right back over here feeling terrible again. And that's okay, that's a natural process. But we're going to look for things in a cognitive, emotional, physical, social, behavioral, and what we should have added on here was also spiritual, because we can also see spiritual things that happen too. So you might notice that the kids that your kids, they just can't concentrate anymore. You know, they're just struggling with concentration, or they have a lack of motivation. Maybe they're having nightmares. Emotional things can be some of those acting out behaviors and acting in behaviors. And what I mean by that acting out, you know, would be like aggression, crying, irritability. Acting in would be more withdrawn, afraid to kind of talk, some anxiety. They might start feeling sick, having headaches. They might start complaining about not feeling well because they know something doesn't feel right. They don't have the words to communicate. I think I'm feeling depressed today, but they're going to say, I have a bad headache, my stomach hurts. Because that is how mental illness oftentimes manifests itself in our bodies through physical symptoms. Socially, you might see some changes in their social behavior with friends. Behaviorally, you might see some things, themes of death might show up in their play, those kinds of things. And from a spiritual standpoint, they might start asking a lot of questions. What happens after death? You know, what is the purpose of life even? Why do these things even matter? So you might notice some different ways that grief can affect children. And so again, I want you to use appropriate language. Don't make things up. We would avoid you saying passed away or went on. I mean, it's okay to say, I think sometimes we're afraid to say so-and-so died. It's okay to say so-and-so died. Kids are going to know what that means. Listen and be patient. Definitely encourage some discussion. This talks about storybooks. I think Candace and Lauren probably use books too, but I use books all the time. When in doubt, if I don't have the words to communicate with a little kiddo what grief might mean, or what domestic violence might mean, or whatever, I'm going to find a book that talks about it and read the book, and that will oftentimes spark a conversation with them or help them understand. Here are a whole bunch of interventions that you can do when people are struggling with grief. I just want to highlight one or two of them. There's a lot of things in here about just honoring memories and then helping them create memories. So something that I've heard from kids who have lost a loved one before that has really been a struggle for them, and even adults, is that, you know, I forget sometimes what my dad looked like, or I can't remember the sound of his voice anymore. And then those things, just a progression through time, they're going to forget some of that stuff. And then that creates a huge amount of grief for them because they're thinking, I can't remember anymore. I can't remember the sound of my dad's voice all of a sudden. And so I'm always big on creating those memory boxes, creating anything that's going to help them retain their memory that they can continue to carry with them. Whether it's a box that they put some of their favorite things that the loved one had, or it's a picture or a letter that they want to write to the loved one and they're going to store it in their box. Or, if it's a photo that they want to do, and a lot of people have saved voicemails and saved those sorts of things because they want to hear them, like have that saved on a device or on a USB drive or something to where you can put in these things and they can have memory boxes where they can go back and they can remember and they can honor that person. The good thing about a memory box is that when it's too much, you can put it away in a corner and you don't have to pull it out again until you need to pull it out again. Because sometimes we all just need to take breaks from when it's too much. Sometimes we get so emotional that the best thing we can do is just get distracted and walk away. I think sometimes we think that if we're getting distracted or we're watching TV or reading a book, we're not dealing with it. That's not necessarily true. Sometimes it's all we can do in the moment to deal with how we feel is to get distracted for a little bit. And that's okay. I'm not suggesting you stay distracted for the rest of your life and never address it again. But it's okay to get distracted, put it away, and then bring it back out when you want it. And it's also okay to talk about your feelings. That would be the other thing. I think sometimes we feel like we have to be the strong person, or we have to not let our kids see us having emotion. And again, probably not best for our kids to watch us falling apart every single day of the world, right? Or to be too upset. But it's also really good for kids to see that we struggle too, and then see us recover from that struggle. And so it's okay to say, hey, I'm feeling really sad today too. This is not a good day, and I kind of want to curl up in a ball and cry. I'm going to take a few minutes, but then let's find something to do together to where we both can feel a little bit better for a little bit. So it's okay for kids to see those sorts of things. So there's a lot of different resources for what you can do for both adults and kids to kind of help them walk through the grief process. The main thing is that we just want to remind you that it's a natural process. It is a process, it's natural. There isn't necessarily a start and a stop to it. But there are things that we can do to try to help us recover and continue to move forward with the loss. So this was where, do you want to talk on this briefly? Yeah, so we have a next couple of slides about, so what now? Like if you're hearing all this and you're thinking, okay, yes, I'm checking all those boxes, that's what I'm seeing in my kid, what do I do? So we're going to talk a little bit about that.
So, first of all, always the pediatrician or the primary care. They're available. And even if they don't know what to do, they know where to get you. So the primary care provider, always our first stop to go. And of course, a mental health provider. Obviously, we're very familiar with Burrell. Burrell has the Connection Center in the day where you can actually walk in to be assessed to get mental health care, or at least to be hooked up for it, and that is available. The American Academy of Pediatrics has lots of resources online on all topics pediatric, and there's a Healthy Children website, healthychildren.org, also really a wealth of reputable information on all sorts of topics, not just mental health, but physical health and anything really that deals with children. So these are all resources that I would recommend.
And then, yes, so she kind of shared it. So we've got definitely ways that we can connect you. So it's 7:15. I know that only leaves us about 15 minutes to get started just a little bit late, but that's okay. But we really want to take the opportunity to answer questions or give you guys any feedback at all. And so we'll probably just tag team some of your questions. But does anybody have any thoughts or any questions that we can talk about? I know we threw a lot of information at you. Was this helpful? Did you guys find this information helpful? Okay, that's good. What questions might you think of or have? Yeah.
About the services that the school offers for your kids here in high school.
Yeah. Lauren's going to tell you all about it.
All right, hi, like I was saying, my name's Lauren, and I am the clinical supervisor here in Nixa. And so I am so happy to be in this district and to be able to talk about this. Candace and I both do this in different districts. So with partnering with the Nixa School District, we have providers that actually will come into the school buildings during the day and see kiddos that we have been identified by the school counselor or teachers, or even a parent or guardian who has concern, kind of like Amy was saying. And so with that, we have trained professionals, licensed professional counselors like myself, provisionally licensed that are getting their degrees, or their licenses, who are, have their masters, and who can provide clinical services. So that would include therapy, so kind of processing where are these thoughts coming from? What does our symptoms mean? What are we struggling with? Sometimes we're not here to label and stigmatize it, but sometimes helping to find out what is going on, normalizing grief, normalizing some of these things that they're struggling with and helping them to identify coping skills or potentially, like Candace was saying, the social skills you need. And so with that, not just the counselors, we also have staff called support specialists who come into the schools. And they are primarily working with social skill building, coping skill building. And so the wonderful thing too about this district is we take all insurances. We have grants that are coming in, so we don't ever want finances to be the aspect that keeps someone from getting services. So if you or you know someone, I definitely would recommend reaching out to the school counselor or school staff, or even calling Burrell to get that established. Do you have any other questions about that? I know that's pretty general.
No, I think that thank you.
All right, awesome. And just to say too, that we can come weekly, every other week, and our sessions vary depending on time and age and kind of what the kiddo needs. And we don't just deal with school-based issues. So I want to say that too. It's not just if we're struggling with attention or we're struggling with that concentration. It can also be we're struggling with depression, we're struggling with anxiety, or some kind of traumatic event that has occurred.
Those services continue in the summer?
Yes, they do.
So we offer services year-round. The beauty about school mental health is that for parents like me, it's it's really hard for me to take off work to take my kid to treatment, you know? And so what we know is that if we bring the services to the kids in the school, they're 80 times more likely to get a service. And so that's what we do. And so it's really just treating mental health issues at school, and all of the Nixa school counselors can set up referrals for kids if you've got, if you're interested in it. And they don't have to, a parent can refer too. And so you could even call the school counselor and say, hey, I'd like to refer my kiddo to Burrell. How do I do that? And they can get you connected with that as well. Any other questions?
One more.
Yeah.
What's the turnaround time once they start the referral?
Really good question. Yeah, that's a great question. So I wish I could tell you 2 weeks. That would ultimately be my goal. You know, I'll just use this district for an example because this is where we are. We partnered with Nixa January 1st, 2019, or was it 18? 19. 2019, we got about 175 referrals in 5 days. So the volume is really, really high, which is not, and that's not unique to Nixa. We're in 50 districts across the state. That's what a lot of them are like. And so I say that to say it might take a little bit longer than 2 weeks, but our goal is to get the referral and have the first parent contact within 2 weeks, and then see if we can't get that appointment set up. And we do every appointment right here on site. Right now with COVID, we can even meet with parents virtually. Like you can just go to your car on your lunch break if you need to call in and do that first assessment. But our goal is 2 weeks from referral to first parent contact. If there's a crisis student, which we see this often too, then the school counselor will typically say this is a crisis student, and we will do our very best to bump them to the top of the list. What else? Any other thoughts or questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is the junior high or even Nixa high school ever going to consider keeping a full staff counselor all the time? Perhaps on a rural instead of having like 1 or 2 for all students in schools?
So are you talking about Nixa school counselors in specific or the Burrell counselors?
Well, kind of both. If Nixa's going to have more counseling on how to do it, one of these
Okay,
trainers.
so Lauren's going to answer that too.
Is that something that you're thinking about doing, especially with last year?
Well, what I will say to that is I was the first clinician that was brought into the Nixa district, and since that time, we have grown astronomically with the need of numbers. And so at first, I was the only clinician in the 10 schools, and then as those referrals came in, like in many school districts have grown so rapidly, there's just such a need that we've continued to hire to have providers. And I know our goal, though, depending on the need, is to have either 1 or 2 providers that are in a couple of buildings. I know that depending on the school building and depending on the number of referrals we have, I have a provider who is maybe just in 2 buildings, and those are the only 2 that they share because there's so many clients that they have. Versus some other that maybe there's not as many, they go between a few. But we are in schools weekly seeing clients.
So how many full-time staff do we have in Nixa?
So full-time staff in Nixa right now, and we just hired 2 more clinicians and 2 more support staffs that I were talking about. So I would say we have about a full staff of, I want to say 10 about right now, about 5 of the supports and then 5 of the clinicians in this district, and we're continuing to grow as the need is growing and being presented to us.
So we have 10 full-time staff, and then Karen, does every building have a counselor?
Yes.
Okay, so every school building has a counselor, and the junior high and high school have more than 1.
2.5.
2.5 counselors in both buildings?
2.5 at the junior high, and 5, and we're adding a virtual counselor.
Okay. So 2.5 Nixa counselors at the junior high, 5 at the high school, and then we have 10 full-time staff here already. I heard someone say the other day, and I think it's so true, every generation is responding to the previous generation or even the 2 previous generations. And so there's a good chance millennials are talking about it so much because boomers didn't, right? And so I do think a lot of it is that we're responding, we're learning to respond. I think we continue to hold events like we are tonight, and we keep talking about it.
And I agree, we keep talking about it, but we also continue to use the resources that we now use as far as virtual. You know, we tape it, we put it online, we make it accessible, and we just keep doing it. And even if we only have 1 parent, you know what, we do it again, and we do it again. And we do it again. And we keep talking and saying, this is okay. The mind and the body are not separate. This is normal to have feelings. It's normal to express this. And just as you might have diabetes, you may not have enough serotonin in your brain. You may feel depressed. These are not all things that you can control, and that's how we normalize it. When I'm talking to my patients, and right now I'm doing the focus clinic with ADHD, and so some parents may be very apprehensive about medications, and so I'll say, no, wait, if your child had diabetes, would you withhold insulin? Your child's brain isn't having enough dopamine, so they're not getting to their potential. Why would we not want to help that too? Really making the point that nobody chooses this. This is not something that I go, hey, I would really like to feel awful today. I really, really want to do that. This is not something that we choose. And we need to get that out there, that this is not a choice. This is truly a physical, because our mental and our physical are not separate. And so we just keep doing it, you know? We shout it from the rooftops, we put it on social media, and we talk about it. And I think in this age, we have so many more resources to be able to do it, that we just keep going.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one of the things our CEO says often that I really appreciate is he says you have to talk about mental health at the dinner table. It has to be a part of your dinner table conversations. And so, you know, along with those, so tell me something that you did at school today, or what kind of homework do you have? I mean, how are you feeling? You know, if you've been feeling sad, like really teaching them those things. So I hear your frustration, and I validate that, and I, as a therapist, have been so frustrated myself. And I will tell you, and Dr. Fusco would probably agree with me, and Candace and Lauren, I've been in this field for nearly 20 years, and you know, we're talking about it more now than I've ever seen. And so although it feels like we have a long way to go, we've also come a long way. And I think that gives us hope for the future generation. And I know my kids are constantly talking about mental health related stuff. And I see it on their friends' social media, because I'm that mom that stalks their social media, right? So I think that we just keep doing what we're doing. You know, Rome wasn't built in a day, and do we want things to be a whole lot better? And do we want to promise that no kid is never going to feel bullied or never want to take their life again, or adults? I mean, no. I mean, that those things aren't going to happen. But we have to continue to just work on talking about it, encouraging dinner time conversations. I love how you mentioned social media. That's something the boomer generation didn't have at this time to share. And so share the heck out of it. Share it all the time and talk about it and invite people to come, all of those sorts of things. And like Dr. Fusco said, hey, if a parent's going to show up, we're going to show up. We're going to show up. And that was one parent that heard, and maybe 100 more that are going to watch it online that weren't here tonight. And so even if it's worth just having it recorded, it's worth it.
One other thing too, and as Amy said, there's always hope. And I will tell you, even in the medical world, as far as pediatrics goes, when I went through my training, I had absolutely zero pediatric psychiatry training. But it's very different now. All of our residencies have it. We talk about it. The American Academy of Pediatrics has programs. They're very, very proactive. So even though it may seem like, hey, we're not getting anywhere, we really are. The world is very, very different as far as even professionals going, you know what, this is something we've really not addressed appropriately, and this is not okay. So I do think there's still hope and we're changing.
And I just want to add to that, I feel like this in itself is evidence of the hope and help, you know, that the community is doing. And I have to say I was on the front lines, because it is, like you were saying, kind of, it can be a battlefield, right, as we're working through some of these things, in some of these crises and loss that have occurred in the schools. And I see hope, and I see help. I see, you know, what is that phrase that, you know, when you have a problem or a crisis, look for the helpers. And I know that there are a lot here in this district, and I even saw students helping students, you know, talking about mental health and talking about loss and their emotions on the days where we experienced terrible tragedy, you know, in this district. I saw teachers talking about it, normalizing it for their students, you know, and so even what you were saying, Amy, kind of just one of those ways to deal with grief and cope, and I think to normalize mental health is that us, like adults, are talking about it as well, and then those who are feeling comfortable help others feel more comfortable in doing it as well.
Yeah, I'm just going to add that I actually think I love the program that we're in, school-based clinicians in the schools, because I do think it helps to normalize it. Not only are we working with the kids that are our clients, but we've become such a part of the school culture that the kids all realize, to a certain extent, the program that we're a part of, and I think it normalizes it because we go into so many of the classrooms and we're seeing so many of the peers. So I did want to point that out. Just back in 2006 through 2009, actually I did my dissertation, my thesis dissertation on the stigma of help-seeking behaviors in rural and urban adolescence. That was kind of my area. I wanted to look at those differences and the related stigma, and there were differences, but I've seen a huge change just in the 10 years. At that time, they were talking about in rural communities how that they would park their pickup trucks like around the corner so people wouldn't see them going into offices for therapy. I hear the language changing, social media, TikTok videos, people, I can see the kids, they're ready, they're willing to express, to relate to others with their own experiences. And I just don't feel like that would have happened 10 years ago. So I do think that there have been some changes. One way that I see this especially is when I go to get a kid, it's very rare. I'll always ask a child, do you want me to have the office call down for you? Do you want me to take my badge off? I'll have a few. Some of my kids that have really high anxiety, where I'll take the badge off, that they don't want that, but more children by far, they're perfectly fine with it. It doesn't bother them whatsoever.
I'll second that. I got introduced to some groups of people recently. It's like trying to be incognito here, but some of them really are proud of it and wanting to, share that.
The last thing I'll add about schools is I think it's important that people understand that we launched this program in August of 2018, and we have 3,500 kids enrolled in services in 50 schools. And what that tells me, and that is only because schools are saying, we need you and we want your help. I mean, I have not had to beg, borrow, or plead to have a partnership in a single school district. In fact, it was moving so fast at one point in time that everyone on my team except for me was saying, Amy, you cannot onboard one more school. You can't do it. And I kept saying, no, we are going to, because kids need help. And then people were like, Amy, no, you have to give us just give us a 3-month break. Like, let us catch our breath. I mean, it was that intense. And so I know schools are open to this. It's not that they don't care about the mental health of their kids, they do, and they're longing for the help. They are asking us for our help. They're recognizing it as well. I was visiting with the school administrator, and he said 3 years ago, he was at like the Missouri State Superintendent's meeting, maybe it was 5 years ago, and they put like the top 10 things that superintendents are concerned about in their district. And he said, it's always kind of similar. He said 5 years ago, mental health was not even on the top 10 list. He said every year it's top 3 now, every year. That this is what superintendents are saying is their biggest concern for their school district. I'm sure you're not going to be surprised to hear school safety is always in the top 3 as well. And so I do think school districts are interested in it. They're inviting us in. They're giving us so many referrals we can't keep up. And I'm super encouraged by although it's been an insane amount of work, trust me, it's been a crazy amount of work. These girls can attest to it. We can't stop because the need is severe and all we're doing is growing. We started, in August of 2018, we have 250 full-time school-based folks in Southwest Missouri. Well, Missouri in general. So we have grown by leaps and bounds in 3 years, really. Okay, we're over our time. Any last minute questions? These are really good. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to visit. Any last minute thought or question? I don't want anybody to feel like they wanted to say something and we talked. You guys good? Okay. All right. Thank you for coming. Thank you so much.